Thanks for having me. Been a fan of this podcast for a while. You got a lot of huge names in the Mass Timber community on here. So it's an honor to be on here. Yeah, Dean Lewis, Director of Mass Timber for Skanska, joined Skanska just this past year. Prior to that, was a structural engineer for about a decade, and then joined Swinnerton's self-performed Mass Timber Group, aka Timber Lab. And then from there went to Sidewalk Labs, the offshoot of Google, and then came to Skanska.
Well, tell us about some of the projects that you've been part of recently and that have been exciting and worth mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I came aboard Skanska, I was actually kind of surprised because we had a pretty big portfolio of mass timber projects already. And so now, just this past year, we've done 22 projects across the United States. The majority of those in the United States, or sorry, in the Pacific Northwest. And 8 of those were done last year. 6 of those were in the Pacific Northwest. 5 of those were self-performed, and each one a little bit different. We've got a project out in Princeton where we did NLT with our team out there. And then we did the Cincinnati Public Radio, which was a great project with Nordique with a turnkey operation. And our team, that Cincinnati Public Radio, almost 500 individual pieces. And it was just a 35,000 square foot building, but almost everything was timber. The stairs, the elevator shafts, the walls, columns, beams, floors, and roof were mass timber. So very unique project there. And then definitely the Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Youth in Vancouver, Washington, where our team self-performed that work and completed install in just over 3 weeks. And so that was a project where the owner was very passionate about utilizing timber, and also just kind of a special one. I mean, the schools, the K through 12 and the schools like this are the civic centers where you get to see people's reaction to the timber. Methuen was our project partner there, and that they did a really good job of involving the students early on to make sure that we designed the building appropriately for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. And so just a really cool story there. And if people wanted to see that building, they can go to our website and there's links to that project, which are pretty unique. And so that was a really rewarding project. And then probably to top it off, just a small one at the 8 in Bellevue. So there's a tall steel high rise right next to it. But outside of that high rise, there's a little pavilion building. And that was Skanska CD, our development team's first mass timber project in the USA. And so we were developer, GC, and we self-performed the erection of that small pavilion structure. And so small but mighty is a good first step for us as we try and grow our portfolio at Skanska Mass Timber.
So as the director of Mass Timber, what are the things that you're focusing on the most right now to drive?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to it, and really fortunate to be in the position I'm in because we've got a heck of a team, supported by hundreds of people that are working on these projects, everything from the pre-con, early stages, project development, and then into project operations, and then our own self-performed teams here in the Pacific Northwest. So the duties kind of range as our projects range across the United States, because all offices kind of have, different markets that we're in as well. But the majority of our projects, public work, civic work, higher ed, K through 12, obviously aviation work is a big one in the Pacific Northwest. And yeah, duties range basically anything that's mass timber, and from the beginning, early stages of the project through execution, building closeout, building acclimation, and making sure everything is carried out properly. There's a lot of details that go in between, but yeah, it ranges because in the Pacific Northwest, we self-perform the work. And so we actually have composite crews we are signatory to both carpenters and ironworkers. And it's amazing to see those teams work together and work side by side, and utilize their talents where they're best fit. But then outside of the Pacific Northwest, still CMGC and manage those projects from inception all the way through execution.
Gotcha. One of the topics we want to dive into today is this idea of productivity, because it's the one thing that, um, if there is a possibility of a triple bottom line, we all know sustainability is there by affiliate, but productivity is the key to driving speed and everything like that. So, start at the high level. What do you see as the keys of productivity, and what are some of like the horror stories of where it doesn't go right?
Yeah. And I think the key thing that I've learned, in doing projects is that the mass timber is important and everybody focuses on that, especially teams that may have not executed a project before and they want to know the nitty gritty of how everything works. And that is true to success. But oftentimes, more than not, it is actually the items that are adjacent to the timber or ancillary to the timber, anything that engages, if it's the steel or it's the concrete core or it's the exterior glazing system, the stairs, the elevator. Those are the items that typically are not coordinated to the level or depth of the timber, and that's actually what slows us up. And so it's what I've seen a lot in my career, and I'm trying to focus now on Skanska because you can, be the hero and top the structure out in mass timber and everything goes great and you're maybe 20%, 30% ahead of schedule depending on the project, but it's really the overall building execution I feel like that is key to actually pulling a project off and making it successful and making sure that the whole project's successful, not just that one aspect of it.
Yeah. And I mean, whose responsibility is this? So let's say at the start of a project, take it to the very start of the project when plans hit your desk. When are you getting involved, and who's driving the responsibility from the very start so the project's successful?
Yeah, I think it ranges, and it ranges from project to project, project teams, and then the region of projects. I think the early days, it was a lot different. We only had a couple suppliers here in the United States, and we're actually utilizing suppliers from Canada. Structural and Nordique at the time were the only couple suppliers that we had available. And so that was a lot different, right? We were going to the source and saying, okay, we're going to make this building fit you. And now we're able to be maybe a little bit more ubiquitous, and teams are, now, trying to design and think ahead for success with mass timber, which I think is key because, the layout, the grid, all that stuff, getting your cubic footage per square foot down, being conscious of the piece count. Those types of things our teams are becoming more educated on. But still, there's critical choke points for us that are key to get involved early, and it can be, what's the building type? What's the building layout? What are the fire rate? What are we choosing between the building type? Is it type 3, type 4? What classification we're going to use? Because there's implications there, especially when we get into taller timber buildings. You go above 85 feet now in the United States, thanks to the new codes and those enhancements. But there's actually a lot of gray area in the code in terms of, what we have to do in terms of fire protection as we're erecting the building. That's really critical to pull off. And that goes back to my earlier statement where, the timber is one component of it. But if you look into those fire codes, we have to follow the timber up the building. We can only be 4 stories ahead of our exterior enclosure and passive fire protection, before we can advance another floor in the mass timber. And so it's like a key point. You can be a hero with the mass timber, but you really need to, be the tide that raises all ships and make sure the whole project's successful. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
gotcha. And in terms of, I mean, program savings. So let's say if things do go well and you tie and you look at the program holistically and not just the mass timber installation, what is some numbers to strive for in speed? Because this is something that I hear varied numbers pretty much everywhere around the world, I'd say.
Yeah. And I think it depends on the project type. Like I think, early days we were trying to prove that mass timber had speed, and it was hard to do that when we were, below 85 feet. We were, probably 3 or 4 stories, and we're still in buildings that are 30,000 square feet or 50,000 square feet. Now we're getting into these bigger projects where we're able to acclimate that a little bit better and show, hey, over 150,000 square foot building, we're saving at least 2 to 3 months, and we're, maybe 20% faster on schedule. And that's like something that's, in the 8 to 9 story range. And that only can get better, potentially as we get up to the 18-story range. The best example of that, I know Woodworks did a great series here in the States on the 1510 Webster project. That was 18-story, point supported, so a little bit different layout, and the one that we were looking at was a 9-story, 150,000 square feet, and we had a post and beam layout. So a little bit different frame strategy, different height, different piece counts. We had lower piece count than they did, but all those types of considerations. But on average, you'll find a lot of literature out there, and it'll range from 20% faster to maybe 40, or I've heard some people say 50% faster. But I think it really depends on the building layout, the height of the building, and those types of parameters.
Yep. What are the sort of conversations you expect to have at the start of projects? I mean, you mentioned a few times piece count, which is, may be obvious to some, but may not be for others. Why something like that might be important. But yeah, also in general, what's the optimization function that we're going for at the start?
Definitely the layout and the grid and getting that cubic footage per square foot down. Um, it's interesting, been seeing a lot of presentations and numbers flying around and quantifications for that. So in the States, and I saw the USDA's latest report, it was saying they're shooting for an average around zero point 0.6 cubic feet per square foot. And again, that depends on the product type because, if you're in like a type 5B where there's no fire rating and you're maybe at like a 90 mil 3-ply with a really efficient layout, maybe around like 0.45, 0.47 cubic feet per square foot, you're screaming, you're doing pretty good. If you're in the type 4Bs, you're 12 stories, which is kind of the hot topic right now here in the States. We got the 2024 IBC, where we can now expose up to 12 stories of timber. You're going to be in the around zero point 0.8 cubic feet per square foot. It's hard to, have a project, be below that because you're trying to expose the timber and maybe you're doing a hybrid like, Baker's Place is doing, where you got steel mixed in with the timber. So maybe you're reducing your cubic footage per square foot, but now you got more steel. So I think that's the first aspect of it, is to get that cubic foot per square foot down to a reasonable level, but not something that's really going to inhibit you from, an overall piece count where you've got, really small panels and you're having all of a sudden, especially on a tight site, you're looking at how many trucks can you get in per day? What's your loading zone? Are you only going to be able to get in 1 to 2 trucks? Can you maximize it? Do you have laydown space? You can try to get 3 to 4 trucks in, because all of a sudden that really starts to be the driver for a project. And then overall building layout too, like the core, are you going to have blindside picks because your crane's going to be on one side of the building and you got to come across that core to the far side and it's going to slow you down a bit. Those are other things to kind of look for as you're starting to plan the building out and how you're going to operationally pull it off, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the 2024 IBC changes. And just for context, like, I don't know how lucky, or not lucky, but how good it is in the US in terms of the codes you've got, because around the world, we look on in envy with when you say 12 stories exposed as like a deemed as like a, yeah. So tell us about that code change and how and what that looks like.
Yeah, we are really lucky, and we're lucky because it's been a multitude of individuals across not just the United States. Even the 2024 provisions was an international collaboration. Obviously, and even from the early years, the PRG 320 standard is a binational code committee. It's Canadians and Americans, and they've had other entities internationally come in to give presentations on the adhesives and other, fire testing that they've done. And that's from the early 2010s up to where we are now. And so it's really grateful for hundreds of individuals that have put forth the effort, put in the research, and are kind of our own little timber craze to get to where we are today. But so yeah, 2021, we were granted the access to have a cookbook of, like I call it, because you can do a performance-based design, you can do an alternate means and methods, but here in the States, typically we have prescribed design where it's basically a cookbook that says now you have an option to go from 8 to 18 stories. I think that's been pretty well documented. But what's going to be changing now is the 2024 IBC, which is part of the challenge for timber, I think, across the United States is that, that's the International Building Code. That's great, but the rate at which states and cities and jurisdictions adopt it is different. So that is a challenge to note. But that 2024 IBC, it's kind of a good coalescence with the code because there's a couple things that may be good to talk about. So first, you have up to 12 stories. You can fully expose the structure. There's also another edit to where we used to have to add a non-combustible 1-inch layer on top of the timber as we're moving up the structure, which isn't much, but again, we've got so many other requirements on us from a GC perspective that it just added one more layer of things that we have to think about as we're erecting the structure. And so that was alleviated. And that was thanks to testing from Rise out of Sweden. And so, yeah, a lot of this stuff though is going to coalesce because a couple other things that are happening. So the 2024 IBC actually kicks us into the new structural code, the ASCE 722. And depending on where you're at in the United States, I mean, mostly it's going to affect seismic regions. So East Coast doesn't have to worry about it as much. But you could see here in Seattle, where I'm located, you're going to see an increase in seismicity by about 20%. And so you think about mass timber versus other materials and the lightweight nature of the structure for mass timber having a huge advantage now. It also affects the foundations naturally, but from a seismic standpoint on the West Coast, that'll be big. The 2024 IBC, as it kicks you into the new structural code, also kicks you into some new provisions in the concrete code, some are already in effect, but essentially there's an overstrength factor on the shear capacity for concrete shear walls. So now concrete shear wall cores, which we've commonly seen across the United States for high rises, are becoming a little bit more inhibitive. And actually, a lot of structural engineers are starting to do performance-based design to get those cores back down to a reasonable size. So that's going to be coming into effect. You're going to start to see more of that. And then some other cool features is obviously with the new structural code, there's the allowance for CLT shear walls. That'll be in ASCE 7. Some states, some jurisdictions already allow it, but now it's going to be cut and dry in there for teams to use. And so, yeah, a lot of exciting developments that are going to kind of help mass timber get a couple more advantages to where, back in 2015 IBC, I think CLT was first introduced into the code. So municipalities could actually say, oh, it is right there, cross-laminated timber. Okay, we can use it. To now, all these other advantages that we have to kind of put us at a level playing field.
100%. That's phenomenal, man. And what about from a fire point of view? How is fire treated in this cookbook approach as you go taller?
Yeah, so as we go taller, the fire ratings get more restrictive. And so in the 2021, we could only expose 20% of the ceiling or 40% of the walls. Now we can expose 100% of it, but we have to have a 2-hour fire rating. And so that'll be key for these type 4Bs. And that's kind of the game that we're seeing where we're looking a lot at residential structures. And in residential structures, you have your drop ceilings in your bathrooms, closets, kitchens, portions of the kitchen, just to facilitate ducting. And so really, you're not going to expose 100% of the structure. And with that, not only the ceilings, but also maybe the columns or the beam elements. And so we're kind of seeing an interesting trade-off of where the timber makes sense to expose it and accentuate it, and maybe other areas where, I've seen steel being mixed in. And so, yeah, that's kind of the trade-off that we're seeing as we're moving into these type 4Bs in a residential setting, at least.
Yeah. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on, because going from sidewalk labs where it's very, I guess, trying to invent a future, not putting words in your mouth, so correct me on that, but that's like the outward looking. Have I frozen there? Can you hear me at the moment, Dean?
I can hear you. Yep.
I've got this weird freeze I can tell on the thing.
There
But
you go.
Skanska, you're on the ground, you're doing practical, you're driving real, as a general contract, what practically needs to get done. So one of the things we've heard on a lot of podcasts is like, the whole industry knows it needs to change, but there's also this like practicalities of what what's the reality on projects, and you need to drive, you know what I mean? So there's this dichotomy, it seems. So
Yeah.
yeah, so what do you see is like the keys to that next big leap innovation from your perspective of where you're sitting right now? What does that look like?
Yeah. I think just to maybe touch on the Sidewalk Labs thing, I mean, our team at Sidewalk that was focused on mass timber buildings was actually called Canopy.
Gotcha.
And Canopy, if you want to know the origination of that name, just to kind of get a imagine, like you can get a feeling of how forward thinking these individuals were, they had big ideas. So Canopy, the original idea was to actually build a canopy or a dome over an entire city.
Wow.
And that way you could actually create an internal climate and control, not having to worry about rain coming in and, windstorms and all these other events that would happen to buildings. And so overall, you'd make your buildings more durable for a longer period of time. Again, a very kind of outlandish thing to think about, right? But that's actually like, yeah, the origination of the this company was Canopy. So that's pretty wild. And so very fortunate to have that experience and actually be able to stop and ask the questions of why, but also have the resources to ask why, and work with some very talented consultants, and do a lot of testing. I mean, we did uh, 26 different tests on our kit of parts. Um, we we built a two-story mock-up of three bays, of our cassettes, and yeah, we tested that to some of the most robust tests that are out there, and disassembled it and rebuilt it twice, or sorry, rebuilt it three times, disassembled it twice. And so when people think about where the industry is going and where the advancements are, I definitely think that's one thing that mass timber is maybe not getting enough credit for, is the design for disassembly aspect. People kind of think, well, that's not reality, it doesn't work like that. I mean, it does. There's another project actually in the States that Red Brick did with Structure Craft. And I'm trying to remember the team that put that together. But that structure is designed for disassembly, and I believe it is temporary. And so there's, other examples with Holmes and Hilti and their connection systems, and there's all these other proprietary connections that are being developed. And so I think that's something that as the industry develops, that's going to be a great resource for us, because especially when you think about the LCA analysis and, the carbon story for a lot of these ESG investors. Like there's a question about biogenic carbon, and at the end of that building's life cycle, how much of this material are you going to be able to reuse? And there's cases out there where potentially, almost 100% of it can be reused depending on its application. So I think that's one big innovation that the industry can look forward to. I still think, with builders risk insurance being a premium here in the States, we face about a 4x to 5x premium over steel and concrete. So we need to do a better job of education. And there's already great efforts underway, both between the US and Canada, on trying to educate the builders risk insurance, the carriers, insurance carriers, and mostly the concerns there are water and fire. But just like, on the PRG 320 committee, where we had the incident at PV Hall, basically we put in measures that were better QA and QC on the overall product and made it more robust in the end, and gave us better quality assurance and quality control so that we could make sure that, things were being manufactured properly. And so I believe, it's kind of like you're forming this pearl and you got the carbon and you're just putting more and more intense pressure until you're going to make overall a better product. And I think that's what's going to happen with mass timber. I mean, we're still very early in the industry and developing. The codes are still developing. And so I think, yeah, those are maybe a couple of the top things I think we need to work on.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Was that an analogy like a what pressure makes diamond sort of thing? Was that?
Yeah, that's where I was going with that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's a great analogy. It's like you're right. It's like early days and all these challenges and problems that come up, but a lot of the time I'm sure the high-rise concrete buildings had the same problems when they were just starting out. Some
Yeah.
problems, and over time, it just becomes a mature industry, and the cost curves improve. And Is that also what you're saying? You're saying sort of like the green shoots of the stories of a cost point of view, and is that, I mean, is that still the major driver of the industry? It's like sustainability is one of those things that everyone says they want and it's good at the start of the project, but then when the reality is like the QS comes back with the price, sometimes it's, so yeah, how is that dynamic playing out?
Yeah, it's a good question. 'Cause I think you're right on. In the very early days, people were paying a premium to do these timber projects because they were kind of the first to market. They were getting maybe a premium for rents, or they were getting kind of the marketing off of that project. That's definitely gone, right? I mean, it's rare to see a project now these days being able to claim they're the first of something, because almost in every state and every city or major municipality, there is a mass timber project. So that's kind of done and gone. And so then it was, kind of, now it's mostly price of why people are trying to figure out how to do these projects. Is it faster? Are we saving on foundations? Or, are we able to get to market faster than some of these other projects? But I do notice that the sustainability story is starting to pick up more momentum. And, just like the Portland expansion that we were doing, where we've got a huge collaboration with a number of industry partners, that Portland airport is going to stand the test of time. I mean, 2.6, million board feet, and all of it traced and sourced locally within 300 miles. That's an amazing feat that when teams really start to look at that, that is a tough statistic to beat, especially for a project of that scale. But now that story is starting to be replicated over like the 619 Ponce project over in Atlanta. That team did a great job kind of locally sourcing the timber and getting the manufacturers there to hold the trucks over the weekend so that they could process the timber and track that from forest to frame. I mean, that's a great story as well. And so I think there's more stories where people are, taking pride in knowing and being able to trace a material from its source. And so, yeah, I think it's changing a little bit.
Yeah, phenomenal. So I mean, looking forward into the future, what do you see as the future of the industry? Just being fully open-ended with the question, take it as you like.
Yeah, we are asking this at a good time, because I think, we are going through a change. I think in the beginning, yeah, there were a lot of smaller projects, and then definitely the hot product type for mass timber for a while has been office. A lot of mass timber offices, and it was great and it pushed the industry forward. But now, obviously with the market the way it is, office is maybe not as hot of a product for a lot of projects in general. And so I've seen a lot of inquiries come across my desk for a lot of different product types, police stations, aquatic centers, rehabilitatory buildings for young youth. We did a center for hard of hearing, or a center for deaf and hard of hearing, out of Vancouver, Washington. That was a very unique building, which we're proud of. And so I think you're going to see a lot of different types of buildings be utilizing mass timber, which is exciting, because I remember when I took a trip up to Canada over a decade ago, and that was kind of the story that I saw up there. They were just doing all types of buildings out of mass timber. And I feel like if we can get to that point in the States where we've got all different types of structures out of mass timber, there's not a certain, oh, your building needs to be 12 stories, residential type 4B, that's the hot spot. And that might be, and maybe that becomes a growing, you know, methodology of building. And I hope we do get to a point where we can hone in on that and just make that almost a standard, where it's not even being thought about. It's just, oh, you're 12 stories, you're residential, you're in a seismic region, boom, that's a mass timber building. That would be, that's kind of where we should go to. But I feel like we should also be expanding into all these other different types of projects, and not the whole building will be mass timber. I think there's a lot of hybrids out there. But we still got a lot of projects to do. I mean, in the United States, I think we've got over 2,200 projects now, and we're somewhere around 200 to 300 projects a year. And I think the research that WoodWorks, Bill Parsons and his team did, I think there's around 17,000 multi-story projects a year, and that comes from Dodge Analytics. And so, we're still 1 to 2% of the market. So we've got a lot more to go. So in the next few years, it's really just about doing more projects. Like, there's more opportunity out there, and just more projects at all scales need to be done.
Yeah, phenomenal. Well, what an exciting future we've got. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Dean. If people want to find out more about yourself and Skanska and get in touch for any projects, where should they go?
Yeah, if you want, just Google Skanska Mass Timber. It'll take you to our Mass Timber website where we got a couple tools there. We've got a Skanska or Mass Timber trivia if you want to check that out. And yeah, feel free to connect.